Welcome to Bring Your Light 2021, the Path to Recovery. This is our culminating event for the Weekend of Faith 2021. My name is Sarah Saeed, and I'm the Chair and Executive Director of the Civic Engagement Commission. This past weekend, we spent time at houses of worship reflecting on the importance of mental health for communities of faith. Today, we will dig deeper into stories of faith and community leaders who've been working hard in the wake of COVID to help their communities find strength and rebuild. Our hope is that you'll walk away inspired and encouraged with a renewed sense of purpose to support resilience in your community. We will now hear an opening prayer by Reverend Susana Rivera-Leon from Sanctuary Church in the Bronx, followed by a remarkable story of hope.
Good afternoon. I'm Reverend Susana Rivera-Leon, Senior Pastor of the Sanctuary Church and CEO of the Latino Pastoral Action Center. I want to start by saying that it is an honor and a privilege to be with our First Lady of New York City, Chirlane McCray, her staff, the interfaith leaders, their communities, and all that this event, Bring the Light, will impact. Celebrating or acknowledging mental health this month is near and dear to my heart as a pastor, doing pastoral care, caring for not only my flock, but the community in which I serve. It's been a journey as our city, as our First Lady has made mental health a priority, taking away the stigma of mental health, all the resources that have been dedicated to the mental health state of our New Yorkers, allowing those who have been silenced or shamed for so long to be able to speak to family members, to speak to supervisors at work, to speak to their pastors and acknowledge the variety of issues that fall under the mental health category. For me, it's near and dear. It's what I spend a lot of my time as a pastor, facing, traveling with, grieving, weeping, and celebrating when breakthroughs and victory is reached. This all happens in many different ways, and I'm grateful to be a part of this event where we as faith leaders get to share not only spiritually, but come together. And unity does not have to equal uniformity. And so I'm here bringing greetings and a prayer in the Christian faith tradition. I chose the scripture from John 8, verse 12, where Jesus says, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." If you would be so gracious to pray with me now. Jesus, sustainer of life, the one who is the greatest gift of love, I thank you for being the light of my life and the light of the world. I pray that as those who are still struggling and dealing with crisis, who are healing from traumas and trying to move towards recovery of patterns and scripts, recovery from 2020, from the lockdown, from all that has transpired. But I acknowledge that because you are the light of our lives, we are here in 2021 and moving forward. Please allow your light to allow us to see clearly what has happened and to see one another authentically. Let your light allow us to be present in the now, present for one another, present for ourselves. Please allow your light to allow us to hear one another, to truly hear, to hear without bias, without judgment. Please allow your light to allow us to take action, letting those know who feel alone that they're not. Allow us to take action for the voiceless. Allow us to take action for the marginalized. Allow us to take action for those who feel that there is no place for them. Lord, allow your light to Allow us to acknowledge one another in love. Allow us to move in love. Lord, allow your light to allow us to hold on to the memories. As we are dealing with what transpired in 2020, all the loss, all the grief, allow us to hold on to those moments of victory and celebration. Allow our eyes to heal from what we witnessed and what we saw. But allow us to also hold on to each moment that we got to celebrate because of you and all that you allowed this city to go through. I thank you, Lord, for being the light of this world, the light of my life, and the light of so many. I thank you that as this event goes on with Bring the Light, that we all get to shine together, and that your light will allow us to heal psychologically, emotionally, socially, and spiritually. Thank you for being the light of this world. In your Son's beautiful name, my Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. Thank you.
The pandemic put a spotlight on the need for mental health support. On top of losing loved ones and jobs, worrying about not being able to feed ourselves or our families only adds to the trauma. Food insecurity and inadequate nutrition are challenges that have only been heightened by the pandemic and can lead to overwhelming stress, anxiety, depression, and even post-traumatic stress disorder.
And that's why we've started the program called Strive for Five. I am frontline worker, I'm an essential worker. I am the proud member of Brown Memorial Baptist Church, located right here in Clinton Hills. The church is the epicenter of a lot of things that happen in the community. When we have tragic things that happen in our country, in our city, people come to the church. When I first heard about COVID, I thought, this can't be good. And as you watch the news, the numbers just kept climbing. When the doors closed, people were impacted. We had 20 deaths. I would end up getting text messages or calls saying this person passed away and this person passed away. So it became very emotional for me. And that's why we felt the need that although the doors of the church was closed, we were not closed to the people. Just because the people couldn't come here, that's when we said, well, we have to go to the people. Chef Michael Whitfield called me and said, we need to prepare to be able to offer food to people for free.
And there's so many people who were afraid, unsure, and uncertain about being outside, being in the public.
And when people were not able to come outside and when people were not able to get food, that's mind-blowing. No one should have to live like that.
And so we decided to get together and prepare meals for these families and senior citizens to have.
It started out really simple. The goal was just to feed 500 people.
And we definitely are around mothers that are a part of low-income housing. And so their access to nutritious food is sometimes frugal.
And we realized that people wanted not only food, but they wanted good food.
And so just being able to raise the awareness of eating properly and how that affects you mentally, physically, it's amazing to raise that awareness, especially in the lives of young people.
And we put together a team of chefs who volunteered their time, and we put together a team of people who went out to do the shopping and then the prepping and preparing all of the food.
When we first heard about COVID, Chef Mike called me and he said to me, we need to help some of the people in our neighborhoods. And I said, no problem, I'll gladly help you, what do you need? And we just came together and we did what we had to do.
Although there was a lot of fear, we realized that this was gonna grow and grow and grow. I just kept reaching out and just kept asking people if they could donate their time, and they did. We are a very close-knit community, very close-knit family. I'm sorry. And we lost so many people.
I lost about 25 to 30 friends and some family members to COVID. Every day that you would wake up, your phone would ring and you would find out that another person was gone. It was devastating.
You know, it affected my mental health and it made me more grateful. And the way I looked at it was that God gave me the gift of life. So therefore, my gift back was to go out and serve his people.
Cooking the food for the people gave me the strength to go on.
And I think that's part of the drive that pushes me to do this every weekend for families.
The other thing that gave them hope is each one of those bags has a prayer note as well. The prayer card gives people encouragement. It lets them know that they are not alone and that there's somebody somewhere that's caring for them. And so what they were words of encouragement that had scriptures on them. And so many people called me or texted me and said, this scripture got me through today. This prayer note touched my heart.
Even before the pandemic pushed us into crisis, 1 in 10 Americans said they felt lonely or isolated all or most of the time. Those feelings can have serious consequences for our health, including sleeplessness and higher rates of anxiety, depression, and substance misuse.
We deliver pretty much all over Brooklyn. Anywhere there's a need, we take it to them.
So the need was deliveries. It was just like a no-brainer. You know, we have a car. It just seemed, it made sense to do this kind of work. When the pandemic hit, you didn't really have time to prepare for it. So, you know, psychologically, people have to grapple with the fact that not only am I not getting paid any money, the basic necessity that we often take for granted, which is food, was now not going to be available to us. And people need consistency and stability in order for their mental health to really flourish. You've got to have it. Good morning, Ms. Atkins. This is Linnell and Frank. We are on our way to deliver your meals to you.
How you doing, Ms. Atkins? How's everything? Okay, thanks.
It did give a lot of people hope because for some of our seniors, we were the only faces that people saw.
So I know for me, and you know, Frank can definitely echo that moment, that first moment when we were able to see some of our church members that we hadn't seen in months and know that they were okay just meant so much.
To see the smiles on people's faces, it's an unforgettable experience.
And that in itself made us just keep going and just keep going, because I'm gonna be honest, there were days when we were exhausted, but I enjoyed every single moment of it. And if I had to do it again, I would do it all over again.
Sometimes, a crisis reminds us that the most important support we have is one another. Congregations are symbols of hope, a place to share joy and grief, and find spiritual support. In this time, our faith communities are creating networks to keep people connected, be of service to each other, and share resources for mental health help and physical recovery.
And I'm sorry you can't see us smile.
It is my honor to introduce Chirlane McCray, the First Lady of New York City, who is nationally recognized as a champion for mental health reform, named a 2019 World Health Organization champion and a 2020 Empire Whole Health Hero by Cranes New York. Ms. McCray created Thrive NYC, the most comprehensive mental health plan of any city or state in the nation. She also leads the city's Thrive Coalition, chairs the Mayor's Fund to Advance New York City, and co-chairs the New York City Commission on Gender Equity and Task Force on Racial Inclusion and Equity.
Thank you for that introduction, Dr. Saeed. And thank everyone for being part of this special Bring Your Light event. Look at all of the different communities represented today and this past weekend. This is New York City, a gorgeous mosaic of cultures, traditions, and beliefs. Bring Your Light reflects the essence of our humanity, the positivity we summon, and the call to be there for our people, to bring comfort and help people live fulfilling and healthy lives. Maintaining strength and staying resilient has been more important than ever this year. And as Zora Neale Hurston once said, there are years that ask questions and years that answer. 2020 asked so much of people, and so often you were our first responders, providing answers, showing spiritual fortitude beyond your four walls, and giving people hope in our recovery. We just saw the powerful story of Brown Memorial Baptist in Brooklyn, a community that lost almost 20 people to COVID. 20 people. And yet, through that loss, they persevered. They turned their pain into purpose and grew their food pantry to serve more people. They kept meals on the table so that families were cared for and knew they were loved. Each one of you has a similar story of a congregant you protected, a family you kept whole, or a community you kept strong. Today is a celebration of your work, your many acts of generosity, selflessness, and love that you perform daily. But it is also about you. We acknowledge the weight you have carried and how difficult it can be to care for yourselves when surrounded by so many in need. Today, we ask you to remember to nourish yourself as you nourish others. Walk slow, feel joy, bring back the rhythms of rest that allow you to replenish your soul. No one can pour from an empty cup. Bill and I have turned to you time and time again over the past 7 years as our partners in moments big and small, and we are forever grateful. And please know that we stand by your side always as partners as the work continues, and we love our neighbors, protect those who are marginalized and underserved. Thank you for all you have done and all you continue to do. And now I can't wait to hear from some of you who have helped lead the way. Reverend Atchison, the screen is yours.
Thank you, First Lady, and thank you for all of the work that you do. We're going to continue in this important event by hearing from faith leaders and community leaders who are doing the work in the community. We're going to hear about their stories. We're going to hear some best practices for those of us who want to do the work of supporting our community resilience, and community recovery in the wake of COVID-19. So we're going to hear today from Pastor Zach Martin, who is from Recovery House of Worship, the Venerable Yuan, who is from the Fo Guang Shan Temple, and the Director of UN Affairs of Buddhist Light International Association. We have Hajar Shawkat from Sautyetu Center for African Women in the Bronx. We have Erica Paulette from Judson Memorial Church and Faith in Harm Reduction. So we're going to hear more from each of these faith leaders and community leaders, and we will begin with Pastor Martin.
It's a joy to be a part of this, and the opportunity not only to just share a bit about the work we're doing, but to just hear from these incredible voices and workers and allies in the work of making sure that our community has safe spaces to process what they're dealing with in the midst of COVID and all the issues that are facing our city, country, and world. So I'm the pastor of Justice and Mercy at Recovery House of Worship in Brooklyn, downtown Brooklyn. We serve largely those who are homeless in assisted living, transitional facilities, and those who are dealing with substance abuse issues of various kinds. My work primarily has been around our food distribution ministry that has taken place over the last 15 years. I've assumed sort of the leadership role over that in the midst of COVID. And it's just been a joy to not only make safe space for folks in situations of struggle and on the margins of our community, but just to hear from them and make room for them to be able to process what they're dealing with. So it's really a joy to be a part of this conversation today.
Okay, thank you for inviting me, Reverend Dominic, and then everyone over here. Nice meeting you all. I'm Venerable Yuan. I represent the International Buddhist Progress Society, also known as the Fo Guang Shan Temple in New York. Our Buddhist order originally from Taiwan in Kaohsiung, and we can come to New York since 1991. We officially start our temple since 1993, and we've been serving to this community and a little bit outside Flushing in Queens. And in our congregation, we have with our devotees organization is called Buddhist Light International Association. In here, we probably have around like 1,000 people and members in our congregation. So when we glad to be here, and then we'd like to share some works we've been doing, and then to our community. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Hadra Shawkat. I am the Program Director of the Community Wellness Program at Sotia II Center for African Women and Families. I want to thank Reverend Dominique for the introduction as well. It's wonderful to be here and share a little bit about Sotia II, which is a nonprofit agency that really works throughout the 5 boroughs, but is based in the Bronx and Staten Island, focused on mobilizing low-income and no-income African immigrant women and their families to improve the quality of their lives, strengthen their families, and develop their communities in the U.S. And we really think of this work as beginning in New York City, but we hope that the efforts and the lessons that we've learned are also applicable throughout the U.S. For the immigrants, and we specifically say African immigrants and families, and that has been sort of the focus of much of our work, because we found that there really hasn't been any dedicated services to meet their needs, even when we're thinking within the immigrant context. However, since the agency started in 2004, we now serve immigrants from all different backgrounds that may find themselves align with our cultural understandings or language needs or religious beliefs. And so we're really here to serve all folks and help them access the services that they need throughout the city.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Erica Paulette, and I wear a few hats, but the one most relevant to my being here today is that I am the Director of Faith and Community Partnerships for the National Harm Reduction Coalition, where I oversee Faith and Harm Reduction, which is a national collective of faith and community leaders who mobilize spirit, community, and power in partnership with people who use drugs. This is a ministry formerly housed at Judson Memorial Church. In addition, I also serve as the project director for the Overdose and Drug Use Ministries for the National United Church of Christ. At Faith and Harm Reduction at the UCC, we take our lead from partners such as the Peer Network of New York and other communities with lived and living experience of substance use and overdose. We endeavor to be a partner in building bridges between harm reduction and faith communities in order to develop leadership and build environments supportive of harm reduction, both in policy and practice. Here in New York City, we have been working to expand access to naloxone, action to end overdoses with the release of our Spirit of Harm Reduction Toolkit for communities of faith confronting overdose, an incredible resource made possible by our relationship with the New York City Department of Health, providing grief and other pastoral care for people who have experienced overdose, as well as through our work to mobilize faith leaders for critical advocacy issues impacting our most vulnerable New Yorkers, including access to care, such as medication for opioid use disorder, support for overdose prevention centers, and ongoing syringe access and decriminalization efforts, among many others. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. And I think this is going to be a great conversation, just considering the introductions that we have heard. As you have already heard, we have some people who serve from a faith base, some others who serve people of all faith traditions. There's a great diversity in the room. So we're gonna just dive into hearing their stories. And so we're gonna go in the same exact order that we just went in. And I really want each of you to explore these 3 questions. So one, and we've already kind of started that, tell us your story. How did you get here? What led you to this work, and what is the work that you do now? The second question is, how has your work been in the wake of COVID-19? How have you served the mental health, spiritual health needs of your communities that you serve in the wake of COVID-19? And lastly, I really want to hear, and I think many faith leaders want to hear, what it is that we can learn from your experiences. What are the best practices that you have to offer to faith leaders who may be looking to serve communities that are in need of mental health, in need of support. What is it that you can offer in terms of advice? So we'll start again with Pastor Zach and we'll move from there.
Those are such great questions. And I don't know that I can take, 5 minutes to answer them, but I'll do my best. I think one of the things, it's for me, I have been a pastor for about 15 years, and my heart has always been for the marginalized. So those just find themselves on the outskirt with, access issues to resources on the outskirts of what many would find as the center culture, or whatever expressions we think about that place people in positions of authority or leadership or influence. And so I've just always found myself just concerned, curious, and also just wanting to learn from those folks who teach us so much about resilience. That's one of the things that we talk about consistently in our space is marginalized populations have so much to teach us about resilience, about entrepreneurial skills. And so it's not just a matter of how we can serve, but how we can listen and learn from the folks that we engage with in these ministries and work. So that's, I've consistently been part of this kind of work, but found myself just wanting to be very much a part of it. So like I said, our church was started by two pastors who believed that folks just needed to go deeper with their spiritual walk in terms of understanding how recovery works. And so they started some Bible studies in Greenpoint and Williamsburg in the early 90s. Which ended up blowing up, expanding, and turned into Recovery House of Worship to a church now where we serve almost 200 folks on a Saturday. We have more than 300 on our membership roll. So by recovery standards for a church that centers the work with people in recovery, that's a pretty large church, recognizing the folks that just deal with incredible amounts of trauma and ongoing struggles and concerns related to recovery. So that's a bit about the work. That's how I found myself doing it, and recognizing again, wanting to learn from the poor, wanting to support, cared much about justice. The second question about how we've made the work in the midst of COVID is, again, a lot of our work is frontline. We talk about mercy is the open door. Mercy is the door into caring for folks. So we do food distribution, both through a hot breakfast, which for most of COVID until recently was happening curbside. We were doing curbside meals, which was very difficult for us because we place a high priority on hospitality and making space to people to feel safe and welcome. And so we had to create sort of opportunities where we'd ask folks questions. We actually created prayer cards where we took their Polaroid pictures of each person and then redistributed them with encouraging words on the back. So they would take someone else's picture with them, keep it in their pocket as a way just to remind them that they're not alone. Because one of the things we recognize, again, particularly as we think about the homeless, is in the midst of COVID, they have lost access to most of their safe spaces, right? So subway stations, even subway cars, coffee shops, libraries, just a lot of those so functional third spaces. Even many of the subway stations have been become unsafe spaces for them, and many of them are dealing with mental health issues that are not being addressed or are dealt with. So we just make space for them to be heard and seen. That's one of the things we continue to talk about is making sure that they're heard, they're seen, they're welcome in our space. So we've recently, again, reintroduced the opportunity with physical distancing and capacity issues to have people back into our space for our breakfast. And so we just make sure they know that they're heard, they're seen, they're welcome, they're appreciated, they're important, valuable members of our community and important to God. And then the second part of it is we want to make sure that they're heard specifically. So we're regularly hearing just their testimonials about things that they're encouraged by, that they're blessed by. We talk consistently about making space for them to be talking about things they're grateful for, which is so convicting for us, realizing that we have so much we take for granted. But it's important, again, you see a homeless person on a subway or on a sidewalk, a bench, and realize they might have not interacted with another human, might have not had a conversation with another human for days, potentially, right? And so making space in our services on Sundays, making space for people to just share things that are going on in their life, things that they're grateful for. So it's really important for us as we think about it. And then lastly, just personally, when we think about best practices, it always has to start from flowing out of the leader. So if we're not personally, collectively practicing the things that we think are important to keep us sane, safe, relatively mental health in the midst of all this stuff, then we're leading out of deficiency, right? We're leading out of things that we've not taken on to practice for ourselves. So we believe highly that, guarding what we would call Sabbath, we make sure that we take a full day of rest, guard that as leaders to make sure we're holding each other accountable to do that. One of the things we talk about consistently is to admit it's okay to say we're not okay, right? There is some faith traditions that believe you have to always have your best face forward, always have to pretend everything's fine, even for leaders, to make sure that you're always having it all together, that everything's fine, that you're always good. And so we remind each other that it's okay to say we're not okay. It's okay to tap out. And we have to make sure we're leading out of those spaces to make sure we have those wells, those spaces that we can go to. And just one last thing I would mention in terms of how we do this, and this is maybe, this is from my perspective and from leaders that we work with together, is we have to find actually people that we can trust to talk about how we're doing that aren't directly connected to the work. Because sometimes there's a sense in which when we enter into conversations with people that are connected to the work, there's a blurred line that can exist in terms of the work that's happening and being able to speak forthright and honestly and not being able to process together how we're feeling. So we really encourage our leaders to find people that are outside of the work that can speak openly and honestly, can be a soundboard, that can be accountability and encouragement in the midst of it. Because again, you get so consumed in the work that many of us are doing. You get so consumed with the needs and responsibilities and the plans and all the things that are weighing on us. And if you're talking about it with someone who's in the work, you can find yourself slipping back into the leader role, right? Into the responsibility of having to lead or provide answers. And so you need someone who can just say, look, I don't care about you as a faith leader. I don't care about you as this person that's providing, counsel and encouragement to me. I just care about you as a human. And I want to know that you have that space and open door. So those are some of the things that we make sure we prioritize as we think about how to do the work, because it can become very overwhelming if we don't have some of those things in place.
Then I think it's my turn. I've been come to New York. This is my 7th year, and then because as in our Buddhist order, we do have a system. We'll transfer to the different location to serve, because in the United States we have 26 temple branches, including Canada. And so we were being transferred to the different location. Before New York, I was in Austin, Texas for 2 years. And then before Texas, I was in Los Angeles, our headquarter temple. And then for the North America, it's called the Shilai Temple. A lot of people say that's the Western Little Forbidden Palace. It's a very traditional Buddhist temple. Because in our system, actually, I've been renounced as a monastic Buddhist ministers, and then over it's like over decades, 13 years already. And in our system, because we are the very tradition, the Mahayana Buddhist system from China. Our headquarters in Taiwan is over 55th years already. So we are kind of, as we address this in our registered system, is International Buddhist Progress Society. So in the 5 continents, we have close to 300 temple branches. So, and for us, we've been come to the work because we do believe that the faith in the Buddha's teaching, the Buddhism said it's a life wisdom. That's how we call it. It's a humanist Buddhism. So since the pandemic starts, and then after the Chinese New Year celebrations, everything being passed, we started to put everything broadcast online. We put our regular service, and then we start to a lot of the meeting on Zooms, and then study groups, and then it brings a lot of speech, and then a lot of teaching, because that's the way we can keep all the members in our congregation can have more settled, their mind, during the pandemic. They won't get panic, and then they won't, they can still keep the, very stable and then calming mind, and then face all the changes. Because in the Buddhism, and the impermanence is the first very important elements we were teaching. There's nothing will stay forever as what it is. Everything could be changed. everything, when things changed, we got to have the courage to face the change. So we've been, no matter it's in doing our Dharma talk in our regular service, or we do a lot of studying, groups, assisting because I have a couple of colleagues and then in our running the temple over here, our abbots, and actually currently since last year until now, she's still in Canada, Ottawa, because she also the abbots for our Ottawa temple. Before the pandemic, she's just coming back and forth, but since the pandemic started, the borders closed. So we've been communicating. We're doing a lot of the programs on the YouTube. So every day we have a daily Dharma talk, and then it's called the Morning Buddha's Light. So we have over like 7,000 in the subscribers, and then they are receiving all the message that calming their mind. And then in physically in New York, and then we've been during the pandemic, and then the traditional kind of like a Chinese Asian supermarket being closed. The seniors won't get access to their daily grocery. They used to eat that kind of certain kind of vegetables. So we've been we've been deliver all the food supplies and then to their home, and then to our congregation members, and then also the masks, and then we give it to our support to our local hospital, and even the city government agency, FDNY, NYPDs, and then we just have any resource, because we are international organizations, including our devotees organization, as I mentioned, the Buddhist Light International Association. We got 300,000 masks imported at that time, import to the States, and then we distribute in our temple locations, and then also support and all the local governments. So this is we just any kind of supports and resource we could do, and then at that time we kind of it's not only focused in our congregation, it's all the whole community, the whole country. So I think, and then also meanwhile at that time, and then the Dharma wisdoms, and then bringing comforting everyone, and then not get disturbed, and then they can very comforting, and then facing all the changes. And then we bring a lot of practicing. We have a meditation class. We have online too. We have the sutra copying class, and then we're leading them to read the books and read the sutra. And then so a lot of things ongoing online. That's and also, even though from the beginning there's some technical difficulty in our seniors members, but later on it's another new learning way for them to open wide their life. So they all feel the kind of like very supported, and then learned, and then being happy. So for the final question is about what will be the best practicing, I think, to suggest is not just I think it's suitable for everyone, because in Buddhism's learning and then teaching for people, even though there's different faith, is fine, because it could be a philosophy, and then all this the major doctrines will say it's like we will see everything. It's just once we think this is really the whole world, the natural phenomena is impermanence. So we just accept what the faith and what the fact come in the front, but we keep in the positive side, and then keep bringing everyone's confidence, and then courage, and then with the loving and kindness and compassion, we just can we can face all the difficulty. There's no problem, because all the downsides you always have it, the other side is the upside. And then so we just look it into the bright side, and then that's the I think the really stronger and positive spirits, and then that's what we can learn, and then from the sutra, from our Buddha's teaching, and then that's how we supporting into our congregation and also our community. So we never stop to involving into our community work, and then we've been joining a lot of our In our congregation, we also have our youth group. We have our scout troops. We nonstop in Chinese schools, in language school, and we nonstop in continuing going on everything. We make it as normal as possible, and then keep everyone's life, daily. It's keep running and then keep going, and then they just can learn more harmonies and harmoniously, and then to being together, merge, no matter what's the fact in front, and then so they keep continuing to lead, and then everything now we can see, and then the bright lights in the front, and then so everyone's they think they don't, some of them they don't even think that the COVID, it did impact a lot, but they will see this is that's the life, that's the impermanence is. We just accept and then to face, and then we will overcome and move on. Thank you.
Thank you both. I wanted to share a little bit about what brought me to Sotiatu and how I got here, and the work that we continue to do. And for those of you that may not be familiar with the agency, Sotiatu really provides direct services, public education, and advocacy that is there to promote safe transition to adulthood for our community members, curb violence in the family, as well as provide access to life skills and leadership opportunities. And we really started, as I mentioned before, with the African immigrant community because we found that there was a need. Despite that community being one of the largest, particularly in the Bronx, as well as in Staten Island and throughout all the other boroughs, there remains sort of a lack of services that are geared towards this community. It's very easy to say, well, this is, they're part of the Black community, and that's a very different culture, very different faith background, or they're part of the immigrant community. Again, many times people are thinking of the Hispanic community or folks from other immigrant backgrounds that do make up a large population of that fabric. And so we're here to really speak to the needs given the cultural and faith backgrounds that we know our communities are growing up in. My journey here has really been one that is focused on just helping the community. I have been blessed both to grow up in Queens, but also in upstate New York, and with a family where violence was not okay ever. And conversations when they were very sensitive happened within a safe space. And so I was led to really the work of public health. I hold a master's in public health from the CUNY School of Public Health at Hunter College. And what really led me to that work is I needed something that was practical, some practical tools and skills that I can help other people develop through public health education or through programs and actual service provision in the community. And there seemed to be such a great fit between my background as well as someone who's a practicing Muslim and has an understanding of the Islamic faith and the community that is coming through our doors. Most of the time, we are working primarily with West African immigrants, a large group of whom do identify as Muslims. And so we're trying to reach them really where they are. And in my work within community wellness, which is one of the 5 departments at the agency, we really focus on linkage to health education, accurate, quality, high quality, but also culturally appropriate health education, as well as linkage to health care services. So that's where our community partnerships come in. And they both really work hand in hand. Our health education is really focused, and I will say the department only started in 2016, so we're fairly new out there. But we've been doing a lot of work focused on having very sensitive conversations around sexual and reproductive health that we found is a conversation and an effort that really permeates throughout the lives, since we work with children and their parents, and as well as other individuals, maybe multi-generational in the family, thinking about reproductive health education in a larger scope of healthy relationships. What does that look like? What are your rights when interacting with other people? And building resources that really speak to that. one of the first things that Sotia 2 came to address in terms of like as an agency was violence in the home, children that may be endangered in the home. And while it's great to be able to provide direct services to assist once the family's in crisis, we're really looking to move towards more prevention. And that's where community wellness and our services came in, to have these conversations even before with youth, before they get married, before they're interacting and trying to navigate their relationships and need to turn to anger or other forms of violence, or when to understand you're in a violent situation and you need to get counseling and what other services are available. And so I think we've been able to successfully have these very sensitive conversations. And I will say within the past 5 years, we've partnered with at least 10 mosques, and 10 mosques, and of those, some of them have been just youth groups within the mosque. They are a wonderful resource in the community that is sometimes just untapped and not considered as, well, they're youth, they're young people, we can't rely on them. But they're really bringing a lot of progress and moving mountains, I think, in the community and serving what their needs are. Immigrant youth have very different needs than some of us who may come as immigrants older or come to the U.S. as younger. But that adolescent group is very, they have their own unmet needs, and we're here to really address them through that. Once COVID hit, our work tripled and doubled, or quadrupled really, in that we had to now reach people, whereas before we were doing things like just informing folks, hey, the census is here. Have you responded to the census? We really needed to shift our attention to make sure the community is aware that even though you're at home, there's a lot of services the city has ramped up so that we can address those needs, whether they're food, their housing, their education. And we really shifted our work from being, workshops in community spaces of gathering to being a one-on-one call, calling our community members to ask them, hey, how are you doing? Do you have access to these services? Is there any way that we can connect you to something, as we're all working from home? And we found that that's been, I think, our most impactful measure. And during that time, we've continued to provide services and connections to things like healthcare coverage. NYC Care is a partner of ours with the New York City Health and Hospitals. And it's been very meaningful to engage with folks when they're at home. We called a lot of people who hadn't spoken to folks in a very long time, had someone call who said, hey, how are you doing? We just want to check in. And we've really built a very long list in the thousands of community members that we're trying to reach. Of course, this is just a drop within the hundreds of thousands of community members that are out in the community. And we're looking always to leverage sort of our social media and ways to just engage with people at, many more people at one time. But we continue to do that one-on-one conversation. We've shifted our sexual health education, reproductive health education to being a one-on-one phone call. Can we just call you for 30 minutes and understand what your needs are? If you're looking to prevent a pregnancy, have a very healthy baby, because that's what we're trying to do here. But have all of those conversations. And of course, most of the time we find that people are very willing to stay on the line for another 20, 30 minutes. But we've been actively engaging with the community, and we're now sort of shifting our attention to rebuilding those partnerships. Mosques are opening back up. It's been Ramadan and everyone has been really celebrating this month, and it's been bringing a lot of folks back together. And we're really hopeful that as folks are taking the opportunity during this month to really focus on their spiritual healing and connection with God, and their just uplifting sort of their spiritual energy, that after the month is over next week, that we're celebrating Eid, and that the families and folks can get together, and we're able to, as Sotia, to be there to really promote that, get together, make sure it's still safe within a socially distanced environment, but understand that those meaningful connections are very helpful. I will say just the last thing for our just as we've been working throughout COVID, and something that's been very helpful and meaningful from our faith-based leaders is for folks that like understanding what the community is actually struggling with. So a lot of times folks will go to their imams and not to a social service agency like us. They don't need us. They don't necessarily think they need a social worker or a counselor or a public health educator. They just, are looking for their guide, and their imam is their trusted person in the community. The issue is that they're overworked. The imam is very overworked, and so are many other faith leaders. But that's where building a partnership with an agency like ours or other community-based organizations that are in the local area is very helpful, because then the conversation is, I understand your need. I think I know someone who can help. They're trained to do this. Sotiatu is very meaningful in engaging with folks in the languages that they speak. So we know that in the African community, many folks speak Bambara and Mandingo and Wolof and Soninke, and we are here to speak all of those languages, and getting people, services in the best context that they understand. Building connections, absolutely. And I will say this: I did mention it, allude to it before. We have a lot of new professionals in the community, and many of them have grown up in the mosque. So you've seen them as maybe, oh, she was a young girl, they were a young boy, and then they've grown up and now they're graduated college, and oh, they're a mental health counselor. And folks don't think to reach out to this person who grew up within the community as now a professional in their field. And I would encourage faith-based leaders to look at, the young folks that we've been here for generations. We've got generations of folks who are like, I graduated over a decade ago, but there's folks who are just graduating now, but they've become established in their fields. And if you've been able to cultivate those folks within your community, definitely reach out and ask how they could help and give back to the spaces that they've grown up in and have helped raise them, and give them the values that you probably will find align with the community because they've grown up there, and they're also trusted folks within the community. And so there's many resources that are available. I know the Bronx in particular is resource heavy, and somehow at the same time folks can't access, and there's too many wait lists, and and so we understand that's a very real reality, but it begins with building those linkages and those partnerships before community members are reaching out for services. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you so much. And I recognize our time is probably coming closer to an end. So what I was going to do is focus a bit on faith and harm reduction, and our work here in New York City really kind of amped up as overdose was continuing to really, or we were better being able to understand the impact of overdose in particularly vulnerable communities, and the power and opportunity for communities of faith to partner with organizations, including unions of people who use drugs, to try and eradicate some of that harm. I'm sure the statistics on overdose are well known to many of us, especially the devastating impact COVID had on those rates. The CDC indicates that approximately 82,000 drug poisoning deaths occurred in the US in the 12 months ending in May 2020, which is to date the largest number of overdose fatalities reported in 1 year. And we understand, based on preliminary evidence, that this number was only going to skyrocket, and did skyrocket throughout COVID. What these stats don't reveal is that Black, Indigenous, and other New Yorkers of color suffered and suffer these losses in disproportionate measure. Yet another clear expression that our understanding is that the overdose crisis is at its heart a social justice and a racial justice crisis. The other story that this data we realized did not reveal is the tens of thousands and more lives that have been saved from accidental overdose because of the relentless work of organizations like the Peer Network of New York, harm reduction organizations here in the city, including syringe service programs, and other unions of people who use drugs, who developed creative and resourceful ways in the midst of just countless odds and often incredible danger to their own selves to ensure that life-saving harm reduction resources and opportunities for healing and connection continued to be accessible to people at risk of overdose, in partnership with and led by people who use drugs. We know that for people at risk of overdose, that social inequity, disconnection, isolation, and stigma are the primary wounds which drive this harm. And as a movement of faith leaders invested in harm reduction and the health and wholeness of communities impacted by substance use and racialized drug policy, we decided we would proudly proclaim that people who use drugs are beloved by God. And this is when we all had an opportunity to share a bit of our stories. My story is that I'm a person in long-term recovery who has been in a healing process from problematic substance use and overdose, and am a faith leader. And by virtue of having the opportunity to sit in both the harm reduction space, sit in my role as part of the ministerial team at Judson, had the opportunity to really listen into these spaces and realize there was a real incredible wealth and opportunity to do some bridge building, to work at kind of harnessing the power of faith, the voice, the prophetic voice of our faith leaders and our membership to ensure that all people, that people who use drugs and others hear themselves included within the context of the beloved community, and that all people hear their names called. We focused quite intensively over this past year on finding really concrete and practical strategies for communities of faith here in the city and beyond to be able to be responsive to these issues in their congregations, recognizing, as Hagar said, that our faith leaders are incredibly overwhelmed by the immensity of issues they're called to respond to and be responsive to, and add COVID. So one of our main strategies was to find ways to resource faith leaders to be able to articulate and be responsive and make some of those community partnerships and linkages that have been referred to. In our toolkit, we list almost 100+ strategies for incorporating overdose prevention and other harm reduction efforts into existing health and wellness offerings, alongside opportunities for faith leaders to lend their voice to the prophetic chorus of support for the sacred work of harm reduction. We developed some strategies, and this is some of what we have been doing over this past year. And I think it's also, I wanted to extend it as an invitation to folks who may be looking for ways to be able to be responsive and to co-create sacred space in partnership with people who use drugs in their own community context. One is that we celebrate the life-saving work that people who use drugs and their communities have been doing to love each other back to life during this time, and that we take their lead, we lift up their leadership, we understand that they are the experts, and we are merely attempting to help elevate and ensure that the light is on their voices. We invite folks to connect with Faith and Harm Reduction to host a conversation in your community about the stigma of substance use and the way that this is showing up, and or maybe it's not showing up. And folks are, we understand it's a really difficult conversation to have. And we would like to help folks have those conversations, as well as explore opportunities to strengthen and build communities of care and justice for people at risk of overdose. We've been doing a lot, and we invite folks to have us in to host an overdose prevention training and naloxone distribution service for your congregation. We do all of these in partnership with the Peer Network of New York and other New York City DOH folks. We also invite folks to download the Spirit of Harm Reduction Toolkit to access spiritual care, theological and other liturgical resources, conversation guides, and other practical strategies for expanding life-saving care and connection for people at risk of overdose. And lastly, and I think most importantly, we imagine that we would love folks to join us in boldly proclaiming that people who use drugs are beloved by all that is divine and sacred, that people who use drugs are loved by us, and they feel this.
Thank you guys so much. And what we will do is make sure that those of you who are watching have access to the websites and resources for all of our panelists for today, so that you can make sure that you can be in contact with their organization and all of the great work that everyone is doing. But again, I really want to thank you all for your insight and perspective and all of the work that you are doing. And just keep up the great work that you're doing, and many blessings to each of you. And now we'll move forward in our program and see a brief clip from a webinar put together by the Mayor's Office of Community Mental Health, featuring faith leaders from throughout our city. And after that, we'll be led in a meditation by Dr. Kenneth Liao from the Tzu Chi Foundation.
So how do we support mental wellness before it transpires into a mental health crisis?
By saying, it's okay to not be okay.
We have to send messages to them that they're deserving of that help. That help is available in multiple forms.
It's really important that people understand that you are human before you are any professional that you are. As much as we talk about caring for congregations and caring for people, we need to care for those who care for others.
Pastors are exhausted and they're dealing with compound grief. I have a friend of mine who has had 15 pandemic deaths in his congregation, and then his church burned down. This is the type of tragedy that we have to deal with, and there's no escaping that. I work with an organization that works with pastors, and we're seeing them, they're leaving the ministry. What makes us more problematic is that ministers sometimes are complicit in their own dehumanization. This myth that the pastor, he or she is the superhuman person and they have all the answers and all that. And it feels good, but what it does is dehumanizes us. Because you know what? We do get sad, we get tired, we get angry. And my gift, if I were to give one to someone, is be kind to yourself.
On behalf of all our volunteers at Buddhist Tzu Chi Foundation, Tzu means compassion, Ji means relief. We bring our earnest blessings of compassion, love, and care to all at this deeply important Bring Your Light event. With the devastation of COVID-19, we reflect on the Avantasaka Sutra, which states that everything is created by the mind, and all things are formed by our consciousness. Our founder, Dharma Master Cheng Yen, teaches us how to implement the great education in our daily living through worldly Dharma. We must have deep faith in the law of karma, and that we must put to the power of our hearts, minds to good use. When we face challenges due to karma from our past actions, we must have a mindset of working willingly and happily, accepting the consequences, and transform our suffering to happiness as we accept challenges as our karmic retributions. We need to continue to be vigilant of our speech and conduct, and bring purity to our body, speech, and soul. Being mindful of how anything we do as a person is a form of spiritual practice. Implemented in the right way, we could eliminate our negative behavior and transcend interpersonal conflict. We must humble our hearts and show courtesy to others. As we gather together here, creating strength and resilience to build back better, let us pray with sincere piety, all united with one heart, that for a world of harmony, peace, and love. Thank you.
I am so incredibly moved by the faith leaders and their stories, and I hope that you've been touched just as deeply as I have. As a person of faith myself, and as someone who has dealt with mental health challenges in my own family, I know how important it can be to connect to community and find loving support. I want to remind you of the resources that we have available, the Thrive Faith Leader Toolkit and the MTV Mental Health Day of Action Toolkit. You will find these linked at the very end. In closing, thank you so much to all the participants, particularly First Lady Chirlane McRae, for work you are all doing to ensure the mental health and wellness of all New Yorkers. Thank you everyone for joining us today. I pray for our collective health. May God nurture each and all of us in body, mind, and spirit so that we can work together to come back safe and strong.